Hey folks, welcome back. So I have in front of me a big old cardboard box from Leisure Games based in London. They finally got a restock of ADB products for Federation Commander and Starfleet Battles. So this is a big old box of Starfleet Battle stuff, finally nearly finishing off my collection, which I've been rebuilding after I lost a bunch of it recently. So I'm real glad to say we're almost there, guys. Just a couple of more relatively inconsequential bits to buy, and then all my shelves will be once again filled with SFB. I do still have a few boosters for FC to get as well, but you know the budget can only stretch so far this month. So without further ado, let's see what we got. I'm just going to do a quick preview so you can see what'll be coming in some future videos. So there we go. First couple of things, we have the Romulan Master Starship book, nice and thick one there. We have the Federation Master Starship book, and we have the Hydran Master Starship book. Notice a bit of a theme here. I think there's two more of those in the box. And in fact, here they are. We have the Klingon MSB as well, which is one of the biggest ones. I think that one and the Romulan one are the thickest, probably the Federation. And my friends, the Tholians, with all their web shooters. A really fun race, one of my favorites in the game. Then we have, this is more sort of utilitarian purchase. This is the Module TR tournament reference. So the idea of this is if you go to an SFB tournament, you'll just be using the tournament cruisers on sort of one-on-one duels, right? So there are a bunch of rules that are a bit different in tournaments and a lot of rules that you don't use. So this book is supposed to contain everything you need to know to play a tournament game of SFB. Now it does assume, of course, that you know how to play the game, so it's not going to have like basic introductory stuff in there, but all the rules you might need to reference for a tournament game are in here. So I'm really glad to have that. When the day comes where I can organize some kind of tournament, I'll definitely be making use of that. Now we get into some more conventional modules. We have F2, the Vudar Enclave. These are a Klingon subject race who the Klingons sort of agreed to help arm up at the end of the General War, I believe. They use ion-based weaponry, and this fully introduces them to the game. You've got, I think, 46 SSDs, which covers pretty much everything you need, including things like fighters, gunboats, etc. And they have some cool stuff. The ionic pulse cannon, the ionic cannon, the pulse generator, and their bases can generate ionic storms, which are really damaging to everybody, so be careful for that. It also comes with some counters as well. We'll open that one in a minute so you can see all that cool stuff. Then, this was a major piece of my collection that was missing, and I was chomping at the bit to buy it again. This is Module K. See, Captain's Module K. Fast patrol ships. These are what eventually come into the game and replace fighters. So in the timeline of the Starfleet Battles universe, the General War kicks off, and people are using fighters, which are armed shuttles. They get faster and faster and better. And then somebody, I think probably the Lyrans, comes up with interceptors, which are more like small ships rather than mere shuttles. They have bigger crews, and they're a little bit better armed, but because they're so small, they don't have room for that much gunnery. Then they came up with fast patrol ships, which are a size increase over interceptors and have a much better balance. They're basically like tiny frigates almost, but easier to handle as far as the rules go, and they're completely ridiculously overgunned for their size. So they tend to be a bit suicidal to fly, but they can do a heck of a lot of damage. They're a fun part of the game. Sometimes I think they dominate the show a little bit too much in terms of, lots of subsequent ship designs have been somehow related to fast patrol ships. And some people don't like playing them that much because they are so fast-moving, damaging little annoyances on the board. But I think they're pretty fun, and there's lots of variants of them as well. And this is the module that brings them into the game and gives you PFs for nearly everybody. For the Vudar and some of the other more obscure races, you need to go to those modules specifically. Also, ADB have recently printed something very important for the newbie, which is this cadet training handbook. So here you can see we've got a classic face-off between some Federation cruisers and some Klingons. And in here we have a step-by-step build-up of the SFB rules from a very kind of intro standpoint with minimal rules, much reduced ship complexity, all the way up to basically full SFB by the end. And there's supposed to be maps, charts, and counters in here as well. So I'm excited to see that. It's also very cheap, $8.99. So if you're looking to get into SFB and you don't want to go down the Federation Commander route, maybe due to expense, or you just want to get to the big game eventually, then this might be a nice investment. Then we have Stellar Shadow Journal number 1. So Stellar Shadow was designed to be a place for the crazier proposals in the Starfleet universe to come to light. So in this one, for example, we have some ideas that have been sort of pretty much banned by the creators and the designers from ever appearing in the real game. Things like heavy PFs, heavy fast patrol ships. They're in no uncertain terms not allowed to be in the main game, but they do have them here in Stellar Shadows. There's lots of cool new weaponry rules. I particularly like the plasma scattergun, starburst plasma, which I added to Federation Commander, if you, I think, have seen it in one of my videos before. And there's some cool simulator stuff. It's a great little kind of journal. The second issue of Stellar Shadows was actually Captain's Log number 28. And there have been proposals for a Stellar Shadow 3 on the ADB forums for a long time. I don't know if or when that's going to come out. Next, we have, finally, this module I've had digitally for a long time. It's possibly my favorite SFB module in the last decade. I mean, it's really a lot of fun. If you like the Andromedans, this threat file basically imagines a lot of what-ifs, what the Andromedans could have been like if some of the Federation and other galactic powers' worst fears had come true. So the Andromedans had done things like building X technology and using fighters and all that kind of stuff, how they might have done it. So there's loads of great and scary ships in here, fun to fly and fun to fight. So a very, very good one. Then we have, I told you it's a big box, the Tactics Manual. Again, this is one I've had digitally. It's a great reference. I think parts of it are probably out of date at this point because a lot has been added to the game since the last edition of this was printed. I'm not sure. I want to say the early 2000s was the last time this was updated, but a lot of basics in here about, handling power and energy, things like the Mizia concept and fights, maneuvering tactics and stuff are still going to be useful in the current game, but there will be some adjustments that have been made that have probably not been accounted for, some empires that aren't covered because they've been, appearing more recently, stuff like that. But I'm really glad to have this in hardcover because I found having the Tactics Manual for FC in physical form made it much easier to just pull out and read it casually and kind of help those tactical concepts absorb into my brain. So I think this will be much the same. Then we have a key reference item, which again I was sorely missing. This is the Master Annex File Module G3. So this is just invaluable for the long-time SFB player. This has basically all the main info you need for virtually every ship in the game to make sure that when you're building a scenario or you're going to fly a pre-published scenario, that you've got all the costings right for your ships and any refits and your fighters and your gunboats, and you've got a fully annotated sequence of play, which is monstrously long. But yeah, it's a great thing to have. I mean, the majority of this huge thing is the master ship chart, which has pretty much all the warships for every empire published up to 2009. And all the captain's logs up to 38. We're missing things like module R12, module Y3, obviously the more recent captain's logs, but still pretty good coverage. And the master fighter chart I found really useful as well. And I found fighters in there that I didn't know actually were in the game, but were obviously going to be pretty useful. So then I could look those up subsequently in the Master Starship books, find out more about them. So having this reference around is super duper handy. The PDF version is even handier in a way because you can search it. But again, if I'm going to play a real game, I prefer to stay away from screens. So having it in hard copy is definitely the way to go. And the last item, but not least, another Master Starship book for the Gorns. There we go. You can see there are big, beefy, bubbly starships there with their long warp nacelles out the back. Again, a pretty thick one. The Gorns have been in the game since the very beginning, I think. All right. So that's took 10 minutes just to show you all the stuff I bought without even really getting into it. So now we'll go through in reverse order. I'm going to open up the Gorn MSB first, and I'm not going to go page by page. Don't worry, we'll be here for many, many hours. But just a quick flip through, and I'll talk a bit about what the MSBs actually are, because I think there is some confusion. The Master Starship books, they do not include the SSDs, so get that idea out of your head right now. What they are is a compilation of the R section descriptions and rules for every ship so far published for the empire in question. Okay, that may not sound super interesting, but they have added a lot of value to this by basically some older products. They didn't have these nice, diagrams of what every ship looks like. They were missing some errata that came in later publications or rules updates. They omitted certain details that could be important in how to use the ship. They've fleshed out all of that. They've given you pictures for everything, for things like PFs where there's some odd variants. They even put the SSDs in for those. They cover ships, fighters, PFs, and things that were in Captain's Log that you may have missed. So I found these extremely useful. In particular, I've recently been working on a project to convert and update a bunch of ships from SFB that I really love into a kind of my own personalized extension to Federation Commander, which basically brings in a little bit more SFB stuff, and obviously at the expense of added playtime, but I'm really looking forward to getting some of those bits of tactics back into the game. So I've been using my digital copies of the MSBs constantly, basically looking up stuff, confirming details about how ships are used and what refits are available, and then using those when I'm making the ship cards. So they're really great references, actually, and quite fun just to flip through every now and again. I mean, you'll find ships in there, definitely, that you've never seen before. I've had that experience a bunch of times already. Now let's look at the Master Annex file. Oops, knocking things over already. This is a big, thick one. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, again, this is a little bit less exciting to flip through, but one of those things that if you don't have it, you will be suffering unnecessarily in certain circumstances when you're playing the actual game. So you can see it's a big, hefty boy. In the table of contents here, we have the index of annexes, so we go all the way up to well over 200 pages. And as you can see, so basically the master ship chart starts on page 14 and goes all the way to 111 where the PF chart is. Then there's the master fighter chart. So more than half the book is just cataloging all these different ships, fighters, and PFs. And that, to me, is the most useful part of the book, so it works out well. So, for example, this is the Tholian master ship chart. So if we go back to the beginning, you see, so the empires, they start in kind of PV, like ship cost order. So we start with dreadnoughts, then heavy cruisers, heavy war cruisers, and they show you all the different variants. And then they have these special notes here, which are explained in the lead up to the ship chart and tell you any little special nitpicks. They tell you about things that people often forget, like carriers have extra spare fighters, which you might pull out of storage in a long battle. There's all these kind of little things that are found in the ship chart you may not pick up just from the R section rules. So, and again, as a reference, this is really great stuff. Then later on in the book, so we've got the master fighter chart, which is very useful again for the same reason. I mean, this is the Hydrons. Now, we know they love fighters, but look at all this stuff. I mean, there's so many variants of every type of stinger and types of stingers that I didn't know were available until I looked at the chart. So tons and tons of options, and it just keeps on going. Look at that. Then somewhere back here, we have useful charts like repair costs for different systems, cost for putting systems into heavy war destroyers, all this kind of useful stuff. Then we have weapons data, and we have somewhere there's master weapons charts. There's year in service stuff. Here's the master weapons chart. This is also really useful to have. So just the damage tables for every weapon in the game. So very useful. You can photocopy these or print them off the PDF. There's other useful stuff in here, like calculating ECM stuff, little extra damage allocation chart things. There's a useful page in here that I've used quite a bit in the PDF, which is about drone modification costs. So basically everything you would need is in here. There is another annex file supplementary to this, which contains the carrier escort chart, which is, again, really, really huge. I think it's most of that book. That's on my list of future things to get eventually, but it's not a super priority because, honestly, I don't really have enough time, unfortunately, to play big carrier battles right now, but someday I will. And then having that list would be a really useful thing. All right, next up is the tactics manual. There we go. Freshly unleashed from the packaging. And let's see what we got in the table of contents. So we start off with a little bit of an instructive story here. Then, yeah, so we've got introductory stuff, the Department of Power and Energy, about energy allocation, basic concepts of combat, the MSSB concept, which is really important in SFB, and then we have tactics for all the different weapons, including very specific things like multi-warhead drones, scatter packs where you use a shuttle to launch a bunch of drones at once, anti-drones, maulers. Then we've got the maneuver section, foreign tactics, so this is tactics by empire. Then we have tactics for specific ship classes, which is very useful, particularly if you're not used to things like, using PFs or fighters. Then we have special subjects, which is more unusual weapons like stasis field generators, boarding parties, fighting monsters, all that kind of stuff. So really comprehensive. I mean, there are, I guess, are there obvious things missing? We have, yeah, like we don't have Vudar tactics. We don't have Jindarians. There's a few races that are missing. We don't have Celtorians, So a lot of things have been added to the game that could be covered in an update, and certainly that has been considered at various points. But I don't think it's anywhere near being on the schedule right now. You can see there's a lot of text, but there are some illustrative diagrams as well. I found it a really good read, and definitely there's some things that would not necessarily apply to specific circumstances in the current game. When you're facing an empire that's not covered, you'll have to kind of come up with your own ways to move forward. But as a basic primer to how to play SFB well, I think you can't really go wrong with that. Next up, my favorite, the C3A Andromedan threat file. And I can't say enough good things about this module. If you ever thought the Andromedans were such a font of cool ideas and could be taken even further, this is the module for you. There we go. Now, one thing to note with this is that there are no counters in this product, but there are counters for C3A in the latest printing of Module C3. There's a whole section of C3A counters that covers most of what you need in here, so do keep a lookout for Module C3 2017 printing, and you'll get that covered. So as I said, there's lots of new Andro tech in here, and that's covered in a pretty extensive rules section. The basic idea is, you can see here in the index, we've got a really cool new weapon, the dissection beam. If you're thinking like Borg from Star Trek Next Generation, it's not far off from that. Basically, you can use dissection beams to shear entire sections off of an enemy ship, and they can never be repaired, which is very scary. But it's also very specific circumstances need to be in place so that you can use it. So it's not an all-powerful thing at all. Then we have some new systems, mini energy modules, suicide sleds, improved pseudo-satellites. Then we have plasma pods, which are incredibly scary. They are pods you can put in a hangar bay that allow an Andro to use plasma torpedoes and teleport them out of the ship to anywhere within 5 hexes of range. They're really, really cool and very scary if you're facing them on the other side of the table. Then we have some cool stuff like hypertransporters, which allow you to do even more crazy stuff with transporter tech. Then we have the spatial distorter, which is, if you know what the temporal elevator is in Module C3, this allows you to do that to enemy units or to your own units. For those who don't know, the temporal elevator basically moves your ship above the map. So even though you're in the same hex you were before, you'll be a certain number of hexes upwards, essentially, so that any seeking weapons will need to travel that extra distance to hit you. That's very handy, given that some very scary weapons like plasma torpedoes, they wane over distance, right? So if you can gain, 7 or 8 hexes, you can reduce that torpedo way down to almost nothing. And you can also use it to basically take an enemy ship out of the fight, because they only gradually come back down that temporal elevator into normal space. So the spatial distorter allowing you to do that flexibly is a really, really cool thing. Then we have one of my favorite parts of the product, which is the Andromedan fighters and PFs, which are really, really cool. They bring in Andromedan tech to make fighting them really different. So yeah, so there's a lot of new rules in here, and there are some weird oddities in there you need to get used to, but I think they're really worth it. I wouldn't necessarily introduce all these new systems and stuff at once, but they are really fun to play with. So, start with one thing. Start with spatial distorters and plasma pods, and work up from there would be my recommendation. Then we have the usual annexes and master chart at the end of the rules section, and then we get right into SSDs, and there are a lot of them. We've got some new style cruisers with an extra lower deck portion. Just going to skip through a bunch of these. We've got heavy satellite ships, like the Heavy Python here, which take up a bit more hangar space. There's a bunch of those. And we've got X ships, which are very, very scary. The X Intruder, you can see, is 343 points, which is pretty crazy. Then we've got some X satellite ships. We've got an X Desecrator starbase, which is just ginormous. Then we have some more X tech here, an armed Desecrator starbase. Then we've got some dissection beam ships, the Incisor. Just as a cool preview, you can see the Dissector, which is dissection beam armed battleship. 547 points. Pretty crazy. Yeah, so it's a really, really fun module if you love Andros. I mean, look at this. The Devourer, what is that? 660 points, and that's without the phaser and spatial disorder refits. Just a monstrosity. So yeah, it's a ton of fun. There's a lot of creativity in here. You know, the fighters use PA panels and stuff and are really interesting to fight against. So yeah, really top-notch stuff in here. Yeah, just go and get it. It's fun. It's great. Just make sure that you look out for Module C3 so you get the counters as well. All right, next up is Stellar Shadows. Okay. There we go. It's not quite cooperating coming out of the packaging. There we go. So this is a relatively thin one. I think this is 64 pages, but it's also not that expensive. It's $7.99. As I mentioned, there's some pretty cool kind of out there ideas. There is some stuff that's a bit out of date now, like all this stuff about the Paladine Empire, which was submitted by Jessica Orsini. She created this empire. Basically, the Paladine are a cool race. Their main characteristics are that they have a lot of center hull on their ship, so they can take a decent amount of damage once the shields are down. And they use a mixture of plasma torpedoes and drones, which is a fairly unusual combo. And they can do, they can use heavy plasma. It's not like limited to just smaller stuff. So pretty cool if you like seeking weapons. But these pages in here are kind of a waste because the Paladine have been much expanded into a full-sized playtest module, which I believe is module E4, Paladine Republic. So look out for that and just kind of ignore that. But the heavy PFs are a big deal in here. Those are a lot of fun if you like flying small ships that still pack a punch. And, if you're running a campaign, you want to have something to build to after the PF era, maybe you want to use these, but they're a lot of fun. And then I really like the added rules in here. So the plasma scattergun lets you do a plasma shotgun into plasma Ds rather than plasma Fs, which is really useful when you're facing big hordes of fighters and stuff. We've got long range plasma, we got plasma buck and ball, and we got starburst plasma, where the plasma torpedo detonates into several smaller warheads after a certain distance. Then we got some simulator SSDs, which are based on the 8th Air Force, which is kind of weird, but there you go. So there's some cool ideas in here, and definitely I find this useful as well when I'm thinking about my own rules editions. This is a really handy reference for that because it has these wacky kind of new systems, and you can use those as kind of a guide of how to think through the consequences of your ideas for the game. So I found that useful. And there's lots of cool ships in here, and then we got all these heavy PFs, which for me were the most exciting part of this because they're a little bit more kind of robust than a regular PF, and I think they're pretty fun to use. I don't know why they're such a no-go in the main game system, but who knows. Now we have the Cadet Training Handbook, which I'm going to open up. It does feel like there is some kind of cardboardy elements in here. So I'm hoping that this is a nice little cheap package for potential beginners to pick up. I've kind of already stated that it would be, but I hope it doesn't prove me wrong. All right, again, so this is about 80 pages. Oh, we do have a proper map in there, and it looks like... okay, so they printed the counters as part of the map sheet. I get it. Yeah, so we have some turn impulse step. We've got Federation counters here and some generic units. And, point of turn, we got planet killers, cloak markers, and then on the other side, we have the Klingons, including a bunch of drones, a few different ships, shuttles, and maybe some Romulans there, I guess, and some plasma torps. Yeah, pretty cool. That's a clever way to do it. Save a bit of money. I know that a big problem for ADB rather has been the cost of printing counters has just become prohibitive for the numbers that they sell, basically. So they've had to be a little bit creative, but I think that works fine. Just take a scissor, chop off those blank ends of the map, and go for it. But I really like the Cadet's Manual for SFB. It does a really good job of introducing you to how the game is played and introducing it step by step by step. Now, you may take issue with, which elements are introduced first and blah, 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 but I think they do a pretty good job. That is pretty universally good teaching method. But if you do want to teach somebody, I recommend looking in here first, because if you find that the order of operations in here matches your style, then you can just straight up guide people through the Cadet's training manual and get them playing SFB after a while. Or you might find that you want to make some adjustments to it and kind of do your own thing. But in either case, there's a lot of material in here that you can use to develop your kind of training setup for any new players in your group. And so this is what the Cadet cruisers look like. You can see the SSDs are really slimmed down. We just have the ship, we have the tables for the weapons, and really that's it. I mean, a lot of the other widgets you have on a full-size SSD have been sheared off to make things easier. And there are a whole bunch of scenarios in here. Then we have all the basic charts and tables you need. We've got the DAC, we've got a sequence of play. So this is for beginners. Then we got the advanced sequence. We've got 8 impulse movement chart. So you build up from 8 impulses per turn as well, which I think is really clever. It gives you a slow introduction to all these decision points during an SFB turn. See, then you go to 16 impulses and a advanced impulse procedure chart to go with it. Then we get up to the full 32 impulse monstrosity, which is really great. And then we have the SSDs at the end. So we have the Cadet cruisers. Then we have the more advanced versions, which do take up the full page. And then you have more information here, all the turn modes and probes and boarding parties and all that kind of stuff. So really, if you get to the end of this thing, you'll pretty much be able to play full SFB. You won't be intimidated by the rulebook. Really everything you need is in here. And if you just want to keep playing the Cadet version, there's actually a ton of good ships in here. So it's really worthwhile. And in the other map, we've got some of the other empires as well. So we've got ISC over there. We've got a Lyran with ESGs. That's cool. Then what do we got over here? We've got Hydrons with fighters even. And we've got Kzinti. So really, a lot of the core empires are available here. And plenty of play value in this, really. I mean, all you need besides this is, some scratch paper, some pencils, and a couple of D6s, and you're good to go, basically. So, I would definitely get this. I think, the fact that it comes with those 2 maps with the counters printed on the edges is very clever. Obviously not as cool as, like, proper die-cut counters, but, for the price, I think that's a really clever idea. And plus you have maps that you can just lay down and immediately start flying. So that's very cool. Okay, on to Module K, Fast Patrol Ships. Now, this is a module that's been out for some time. I would like to see an update to this at some point, and eventually they will have to, because they've only been putting modules on PDF stores like Drive-Thru RPG and whatnot after they've had a full update for any errata and everything. So eventually they will do that. But so the latest SSD format is not used in this because I think it was published in 2000 or so. But this is in a typical format as you would expect for an SFB module. We have our rulebook. So here we have all the operations you need, the Section K rules for PFs. So general instructions, PF tenders, interceptors, leader PFs, the PF specific damage allocation chart, rules about engines falling apart, Death Rider, Suicide PFs, and crew rules. Then we have the R section rules for all the PFs and their tenders that are available in the SSD book. Then we've got some scenarios, historical scenarios, and the PF Flotilla campaign, which is a lot of fun, by the way. Very cool. And I'm not going to go too much into this. One thing that's worthy of note is in the R section, you have some additional variant SSDs in here that there wasn't space in the SSD book for these, so they put them in here. They're ones that are going to be less frequently used, so if you're mine warfare, ground assault, that kind of stuff. The more typical variants that will be used by the empires more often are in the SSD books as well. Just keep that in mind. If a variant seems to be missing, it may well be in the rulebook instead. Then we have a bunch of counters. So we've got an ammo sheet here. We've got some plasma torps, shuttles, drones, more plasmas, web, more drones, some small plasmas, drones, fighters, drones. So yeah, with PFs, you'll be running flotillas of 6 of them, and they will be hurling a lot of seeking weapons around typically, so it's good to have the extra ammo counters. Then we have the PFs themselves, so we got a bunch of PFs, 2 flotillas worth looks like, approximately, for the Gorn, and then we have some interceptors, which were the precursors. Same again for the Gazintis, Hydrons, ISC, Windstar Cluster, and the Lyrans. Then we have, of course, the Feds, the good old Klingons, some Kzinti, Gorn. These are their PF tenders, so these are the ships that carry and service PF flotillas. Then we got Romulans and their PFTs and Tholians as well. So, yep, nice comprehensive set of counters. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of the SSD book because I want to do a whole video about PFs at some point to talk a little bit more about their effect on the game. Just to give you a few examples. So, in the real SFU history, the Feds did not use PFs because each PF has about 30 crew and they tend to die a lot. Whereas if you have a heavy fighter, it'll just be 1 or 2 people that blow up if it blows up. And so the Federation, wanted to preserve life and limb, so they didn't go down that route. However, if you're running a campaign and you want to go down an ahistorical route, they do provide Federation PFs in here that you can use if you don't want to follow the Federation's philosophy, which of course is your prerogative if you're playing as the Federation Admiral of the fleet. Here we have some PFs for the Klingons. They've got a couple of different types. We've got the H1s, and we've got G1, and we've got the G1K, which I believe is up here. Yeah, there we go. These are enhanced anti-fighter variants. For the Romulans, we've got some interesting ones. So they have, first of all, the Decurion interceptors. You can see how tiny the interceptors are. They've only got 2 shields rather than 6. And then their proper PFs, they've got a couple of different ones. They have the Centurions. You can see they're heavily gunned. They've got 5 Plasma F torpedoes on this tiny space frame. They have a full 6 shields, as most PFs do. In fact, all PFs do. But then what the PFs I really like for the Romulans, if I can move this page open, are the Starhawks. These are modular, right? So a typical PF flotilla, you'll have 6 in total. One of them will be a leader that has some command facilities. One will be a scout that has special sensors. And then you'll have, possibly just 4 of the rest of the 4 left in the group will just be all of one type. But the Romulans built a modular PF. You can see these kind of rectangular cutouts here. Those can be swapped out and replaced with all different kinds of stuff. So you get like escort variants, you get some that are just all plasma Fs. You've got mixtures of, like this is an all plasma F variant. The B, the A variant, you have phaser 1s and plasma Fs. Then you've got escort variants that have plasma D racks in there. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, so some more Starhawk variants are on the very first page of the SSD book. So we've got cargo, the escort one I like, because it's got these plasma racks. And then the D is just all plasma D racks, so you can just flood the board if you're expecting a big Hydron carrier fleet or something. Yeah, so the Starhawks are really flexible and useful. And then, of course, you got PFs for everybody. Again, I'm just going to kind of flick through. You can see it goes all the way up to, I think this ISC, or the last Empire covered. Yeah, that's the ISC. And then as with the other stuff I described earlier, if you want to get PFs for the Saltorians, the Vudar, etc., you need to get the modules where they're introduced, and they will have PFs and PF tenders in there as well. All right, so really glad to have that one back again. I felt the absence of Module K not being in my collection. All right, now we have, speaking of the Vudar, Module F2. And this is another one that was in my collection before and then wandered off during a move, and I haven't had it since, but finally it's back in the game. So this one, it's got a relatively small SSD book because they're a relatively small empire, and some of their history is kind of conjectural here. But we do get a nice set of 108 counters with the yellow on black, which is pretty cool. A bit of cyberpunk kind of vibes from that color scheme. You can see we've got a whole range of ship types from Dreadnought all the way down to fighters down here. We've got PFs, of course. We've got war destroyers, we've got pods, we've got shuttles, MRS and GAS shuttles, some mines. Everything you need to run this new empire is all here, including battle stations. So that's really great. You have, of course, the rulebook, which includes everything you need to know about their ion-based weaponry. Although, again, if you have the Master Rulebook, that'll be in there anyway. So you've got 4 main systems. You've got the ion cannon and pulse cannon. Then you've got ion pulse generators and ion storm generators under the G rules, the system rules. The ion pulse generators are for kind of getting rid of drones and small craft around you. The ion storms can flood a whole area with really terrible space weather and mess up a lot of things for your opponent, but they are more indiscriminate in their effect, so watch out for that. Yeah, the Vudar are pretty cool. Definitely change of pace, and they're really good against drone-using races and fighter-using races. That's their particular strength. The concept is that they live in a kind of dense world of radiation, and they're very well adapted to ionic radiation, so they use it to their advantage and shred other organic life that is not so well adapted. So in the SSD book, we've got 48 pages, so 46 ships in total, building up from the light cruiser here in the beginning. Then we got auxiliary stuff like PF tenders, carriers, and Q ships at the end, and we've got our PFs, of course, and some variants. And then where's the Dreadnought? He's in here somewhere. Oh yeah, right towards the beginning. Let's look at a big guy, just to give you a taste. So this is the Vudar Dreadnought. So it comes in 236 points. You can see we've got ion cannons to the front, a whole mess of phaser ones, quite a bit of shield coverage up front. A lot of labs. Then we've got the ion pulse generators, and there's 3 of those. Where's the table? Is there a table for it on here? Maybe not. But anyway, the ion pulse generator really helps protect this thing from incoming drones. It pretty much just laugh them off unless it's a really huge wave of them. Then there's some more ion cannons in the back and some phaser 2s for kind of rear defense. So a pretty robust ship, a lot of heavy weapons mounted on there as well. And then, yeah, you got a whole bunch of cool stuff. We've got some carriers, space control ships in the auxiliary format. Then we have the PFs. Now these guys, we've got smaller ion cannons. They can only affect out to range 10, but they do a reasonable amount of damage. They're not as punchy as like a photon torpedo, but they're pretty good. They tend to be more accurate as well. So there's another page, or no, it's here. Okay. So these are the standard PFs. You can see they come with a couple of ion cannons up front, and then they're armed with phaser 2s and 3s. So not so good on the phaser armament front. So you may want to use those for more defensive purposes, or if you really get into a close-up knife fight. But the ion cannons are pretty good, and they also have a proximity firing mode, which will do more damage at wider ranges. So they're pretty effective at standoff ranges against other PFs. So there you go. That's your whirlwind introduction to the Vudar. Again, I will cover them. I want to do a little bit on the Vudar and the Jindarians as well at some point. Jindarians are a sort of race of prospectors that live in asteroid ships, which are pretty cool conceptually, but they're a little bit annoying to play in the game, and I'll explain that when we get to it. All right, next up, so we're almost there, guys. The last few are just going to be pretty quick because you pretty much know what these are about, except I'm going to show you a little bit of the TR tournament reference, because I myself am curious. This is one that I did not have in my collection before because I didn't know it existed. So it seems like a really useful thing, and I hope I wasn't mistaken in that impression. Captain's Module TR, there we go. So what do we have? Table of contents. Okay. So we cover some important stuff here. Mid-turn speed changes, hover warp for the flivvers, Andromedan power absorbers, using chaff for fighters, passive fire control, fusion beams, hellbores, PPDs, webcasters, web snares, web fists, web breakers, shield crackers, particle cannons, hyper drones, scatter pack, plasma D, plasma rack, hasty repairs, displacement devices, ESGs, dogfighting, rear torpedoes. Okay, and then it tells you, all right, where these rules are coming from. Okay, so their idea was to print a rulebook which has all of the race and system rules you need beyond the basic set and tournament module itself. Okay, so the idea is that you would have this, module T, which is the tournament reference, and the basic set, and then that would be enough to get you through any tournament situation. That is cool. All right, yeah, and it's it's a nice small little thing. It's not hefty at all, so to only need those 3 rule books for a game as complex as SFB is not too bad. I mean, by the standards of any other game, it's kind of crazy, but this is SFB we're talking about. So there you go, 64 pages in all, and covers all the special rules for the different races that are available in tournament and all their special systems and weapons. So that is very cool. All right, now the last few things here are all Master Starship books, so I'll just do a quick flip through. Again, I already own these in digital form, so this is just to have, physical copies to kind of, when I'm lazing around and I want some SFB thoughts in my brain, or if I'm doing work on my FC ship card projects, then I will bust these guys out. So the Tholians, love these guys, and the book is very thick because they've got a lot of attention in this game, which is great. Yeah, and what was useful to me in particular about this MSB was the fighter and PF section, which I'll see if I can find. Yeah, so I really hadn't realized how useful some of these variants were, like the phaser web PF. It seems obvious in retrospect, but this is a PF where everything is just phasers, so there's no disruptors. It has web generators, right? So that means it can power up web if you've set some up or cast some and you manage to get it to solidify. And then it can fire its phasers at whim through those webs, and it's got a bunch of them. So get a couple of these in your flotilla and you'll be laughing as you riddle your opponent with phaser holes. And it can use its overpowered warp boosters to help boost the web and keep it solid. So very cool. And I really didn't know about these variants because I'm not an experienced PF player. And there's mine warfare, all that usual stuff in here. The interceptors, and then in the fighter section, there was some interesting stuff in the heavy fighters. They put a lot more detail into these R section rules for each individual ship. So as well as getting these cool little top-down views of each ship, they do talk a little bit more about history, what the use of these fighters was intended to be, and then the actual game-relevant information that you need to use them. So, as an avid fan of the Tholians, I actually did learn quite a bit from this book. So, strongly recommended if you are a Tholian fan like myself. And it also includes all the latest stuff, including Module R4T, which is great. And in fact, all of these, I think, have been updated quite recently. So you're pretty much up to date if you have these books. You don't need to worry about them going out of date really soon because there's going to be, some huge expansions coming up. I mean, the schedule from ADB is completely stalled right now because of health problems with the staff. And, again, all best wishes to them that those will go, everything will get back to normal for them soon enough. Now we have here the Klingon MSB. I've used this very extensively recently because I was doing some research about the Klingon fighter development history, and there is a whole huge expansion of some stuff that was in Captain's Log that is now in this book, which goes through all these different variants that I'd never heard of. So we have the Escort ZEC fighter, for example. It's got a couple of drones and some anti-drones and no disruptors. So we got all these variants of like the ZDC disruptor fighter with engine upgrades and all this kind of stuff. And these were all in Captain's Log, and I don't often buy Captain's Log because it's very hard to find in the UK. So having all this nicely presented with these new, top-down ship diagrams and stuff in this book has been a godsend for me for these projects I've been working on for the game. Again, really highly recommended. The Klingon stuff is really comprehensive. They even have separate entries for things like sub-variants of the B-10 battleship. They don't skimp on the detail here. Which is really handy. Like here we have, the B-11S Stellar Domination ship gets its own entry, as does the B-11SA Stasis Domination ship, right? They're both variants of the B-11 battleship, but they both get coverage, and, they get their own separate listing and diagram and everything. So I think it's really great that we got all this in one place. And I really have gotten particularly a lot of use out of the Tholians and the Klingons. And we have the Hydrons, another good friend of mine. Play these guys very often, particularly in FC. Another one of my projects has been I've basically redone the entire Hydron fleet in Federation Commander so that I can use advanced and heavy fighters, which of course are currently not in that game. But now they are because I've drawn the ship cards myself and I'm making up the rules and testing them. So I've used this book, again, as a reference for what was in SFB. I don't want to go too far beyond what's already in the kind of canon Starfleet universe. But I have added a couple of designs of my own, which are just kind of relatively small variants of things that appeared in SFB. One thing to note about the Hydrons, they are really good at small craft, not just the fighters, but they've got several types of PFs. You've got the Harriers, which use fusion beams. We've got the, what are they called? Hellions, that use Hellbores, these guys. And then we have the Howlers, which use these guys here, and they have 3 phaser Gatlings, so they will just shred people up close. So very good at the PF game, and of course the fighter game. And there's loads of cool additional variants detailed in here. Again, stuff that I was not particularly aware of, not being able to get hold of Captain's Log and stuff. So yeah, this is a really great book for the Hydran fan. Again, really comprehensive. Everything that's ever been published for the Hydrans is referenced in here, and brings it all together in a convenient format. Now we'll look quickly at the Romulans. All right, there we go. Now this one is particularly handy for the Romulan player because one of the things about the Romulans, which I touched on briefly before, is that they were very clever. So initially, they had their own kind of space frames that were sub-light speed. Then when tactical warp came about, they built some stuff of their own, and they bought a lot of stuff from the Klingons, and they used the Kestrels. But then later on, they developed these sort of modular frames of all different sizes. So we had modular PFs, as I showed you, and then they had things like modular dreadnoughts and everything. And this book, they hugely expanded all the descriptions, the ship descriptions for all the modular ships. So that every possibility is laid out in clear language, what the ship can do, what modules it can use, which ones it can't, and what effect that has on related rules or scenarios. So that is really, really good that they've done that. I think that's just a great advertisement for, you know, the attention to detail that they put into these Master Starship books. I think I really didn't think that they would be very useful, to be honest with you. And then I bought one kind of on a whim. And I can't remember, I think it was the Hydrans first. And then I thought, you know what, actually, I'm getting a lot of use out of this. And I was surprised by that. I do hope that they'll reconsider some of their kind of pricing hangups and consider doing a similar thing with, you know, here's a complete SSD collection for the Romulans. Pay us $50 and here's every Romulan chip ever. But they say they don't want to do it because everything would need to be updated. It would take a lot of time, and then they'd have to charge $1 million. But you don't have to charge $1 million. Charge like a regular price, and then everybody will buy it. I don't see the downside. But anyway, yeah. So if you're using any of the Romulan modular stuff like Demon Hawks, Sparrowhawks, Firehawks, any of that, definitely get the MSB because it'll make sure you don't make any mistakes when you're setting up your battle forces. Very, very handy. Alrighty, now we have the last book of today, the Federation Master Starship book, another thick one. I've not used this one so much yet, at least the digital version, because I don't play Federation all that much recently, but I do love a good old cruiser battle with some photons flying around, so it definitely will happen that I'll be digging this out at some point. And there's some really cool stuff that I have noticed flipping through here. Like, I've never heard of the F-104 Starfighter, right? But there's a whole bunch of stuff in here about it, like a whole class history of it. Then we've got the F-101 Heavy Fighter, which is another Captain's Log thing. I mean, there's some cool little bits of SFU invention and history in here that I honestly completely passed me over because I'm not buying Captain's Log, or, you know, I've missed things tucked away in the rules book of some old module, you know. And it's all in here. All the errata is updated. We've got illustrations for everything. I mean, I'm actually really happy with what they've done with the Master Starship books. Now, the only ones I'm missing currently, I believe, are the Lyrans and the LDR, I think, are the only ones I'm missing. And the other ones I haven't done yet. So what I'm really looking forward to, of course, is the ISC and Andromedan books. I will buy those sight unseen as soon as they come out. But again, delayed by all the health issues. So there we go. That's a huge box of stuff. That really went on for far longer than I expected, but that's typical for me at this point. So I hope you're all used to it by now. Yeah, we've got 6 Master Starship books, tournament reference books, a couple of key modules, some conjectural kind of threat file stuff. Yeah, I'm super excited to have my collection nearly back up to where it was, and to even have some new stuff that I didn't have before. It's really exciting. So I will come back with more videos in the future and show you some more about this stuff. In particular, I do want to do, like I said, a video about PFs in general. I have a video about fighters that is still in editing because there's a lot to say about fighters. I really like them. Not everybody does. That's the long and short of it. But after I finish that one, I'm going to take this nice new copy of Module K and bring you all the information you need about that and my opinions about PFs in the game system. And I'll also tell you about where you can find PFs for the other races in the game that are not covered in Module K, for example. So I got some plans already for future content, so look out for that. In the meantime, I hope you're excited for all the future videos on this stuff, and I hope you're staying safe and having a good time out there. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. All right, take care, and bye-bye.